So here's a close-up of what I've did. This is my table saw. When I built the table, this is kind of like similar to the Paulk design, except for instead of having the table saw hang, I just built it, kind of beefed it up with these corners here. My shop is small, so I really couldn't do the 4 foot by 8 foot. I would love to have a 4 by 8 foot table. I used to have one in my other shop. Works great. But this way, my table saw just slides right in there. It will come right out if I need to. What I did is when I took the stand off, it was just the 4 bolts, one on each corner. I pulled the bolts out, flipped them upside down. I still got the stand outside, so if I want to just bring my table saw and don't want to bring the big table, I can do that, and it'll stand right up there with the bolts sticking up. It just fits right on. I ended up used 1-inch holes. I just used a cheap spade bit. The reason I used 1-inch holes is the Paulk system, the clamps are about $45 a piece. I went to Harbor Freight. This was a 12-inch one. I think it was like $4 or $5. I got a bunch of the 6-inch ones for $3, and then went by Lowe's and they were 3/4 inch bar. And I bought a extra piece of 3/4 inch bar from Lowe's. Let's see, this is the end piece of what was left over. It's a 3-foot bar for approximately $5. And with it being 3/4, I needed a little bit bigger to fit into the hole. You know, a 3/4 inch hole, the clamps just didn't fit in there. With the 1-inch, I cut them on a 45-degree angle, welded it, and then just rounded off the corner back there. That corner, this width right here, is what determines the hole. So by rounding it off, I was able to get away with a 1-inch hole. I didn't want any larger hole than I needed to. My fence, what I've used here is, this ended up being a 1 1/8 inch hole. I do have a little off with the router, but what I ended up doing, let me slide this fence out. So what I ended up did is I got a 1/2-inch carriage bolt. I got the nice round head on the bottom of them, just the wing nut on top. I drilled my 1/2-inch holes. I made sure that everything was centered up, and so then I clamped the whole fence here to the table nice and square. I re-drilled all the way through the hole here into my table. Then I moved it up to the other end, did the same thing, and then I used the clamp system to clamp the board down, took my router out, put my router up against here, and ran it from one hole to the other. I actually have a 1/2-inch cutout bit there. I stuck that 1/2-inch bit into the hole and then slid my fence up to the edge of the plate, and it slid down, and that's what made once I got the hang of it, like right here, you can see this was a pretty straight hole. Like I say, when I first was starting, I had a couple of, I don't know, it's going the wrong direction or whatever, but you know, it works. It slides down. One thing to be aware of, when I built the table, I didn't use pocket holes. I screwed everything right here on the surface, but it's all countersunk so that nothing on my surface will catch. But right here, I've got my support members, and so when it grooved through, to be able to make the head come through, I had to climb underneath it, and I actually took a drill from underneath and shoot out around the edges so that head would slip in. I bought two 4 by 8 foot sheets of plywood, sanded. I got the sanded plywood. When I measured my distance that I needed my saw, I wanted my saw about a 1/16 of an inch higher than my table so that the wood would push off of it and catch on the table and not get bound up on the way through. So I calculated, 1/2-inch plywood, and just cut off what I needed to do the side piece. It ended up made my top here 37.5 inches. Now be aware, I bought this from Lowe's. They were 30 seconds, not half inch. You figure out, well, 30 seconds isn't much, but 2 sheets, that's 15/16, which is 1/16 short. So whenever I actually cut it, got it all assembled, I was wanting to be a 1/16, and I'm almost an 1/8 because of the dimensions of the wood is almost, when you add the 2 sheets together, is a 1/16. I could sand that down or sand off the bottom of my table saw, but I've already ripped some boards on it. It seems to work fine. It's only a 1/16 of an inch drop whenever I'm coming off. So that's all good there. I'm going to put some power in it. Now when I did put my saw, the saw originally had the cord coming out of the edge. I wanted these side pieces in there to help strengthen it. So I ended up had to reposition the cord out the front. I just took it off, drilled a hole, used the same original grommet. This does catch all the sawdust underneath, so if I'm going to do a very big project, I'm going to end up, since I am in my shop, I'm going to put a fitting under the bottom to hook up to the vacuum system, and that will pretty much catch all the sawdust out of it. I haven't decided if I'm going to go to box around the router and also create a vacuum system on it. Again, I was trying to go kind of cheap but good. So 2 sheets of plywood, I think it was $21, $22 a piece, so that's about 40 bucks. And instead of building some sawhorses, I just went to Harbor Freight. These Harbor Freight sawhorses were 12 bucks. The day after I bought them, I sent them in the sales paper with the coupon for $9.99 a piece. And then what I did on the inside is I cut a groove in there so that the sawhorse actually sticks up because it's got a tapered edge. So I made a groove 1.25 inches wide, and it almost sits flush. That means that there's about a 1/2 inch of the table saw coming up into the table, but because it is on a taper, and that way the sawhorses are not going to move or slide. They said they're good for 350 pounds. I know I'm in my shop where the floor is pretty smooth and level, but this table is pretty level. It ended up being about 40 inches high. Whenever I was doing the sawhorses, I'm like, oh yeah, I'll just buy a pair of sawhorses. That'll save me the trouble of building them, plus the lumber to build them. And it did that. It did make it up a little bit higher, but I'm getting to be a little older, and I'm actually liking the table. I've done a little bit on it already, and it is actually at a really good working height for me. So other than my poor camera skills, if you have any comments, leave them down there. If you have any questions, I know I built this by looking at other videos and seeing things that I liked, and I tried to incorporate it, and I'm usually pretty good at looking at a design and then wanting to modify it for myself. The one thing that I was kind of torn on, and I still haven't decided, is with my fence here. See, if I put it that way, I've only got the small area to work with for small projects, but then I can flip it around the other direction, and or it'll flip over, and then I just slid it down, but because everything's square, it can go either direction. But now I can do the same small area, and then I have my whole table for my larger side. So however I want to do it, I have thought about, all I would have to do is cut these same type of grooves sideways, and I could even connect from one side groove to another, and have the where I could move my fence sideways.